Good morning, Mike. It's a chilly morning here in Cape Town, and I think it's probably a bit of a chilly morning there. Where are you, in Harare?
Yeah, Harare, Borrowdale.
Borrowdale, okay. We're here to do the second talk on Owen and Dawn Connor of Oribi Farm, which was in the Enterprise area. And when we finished last time, Mike had a few more stories to add on to that. So Mike, over to you, my friend.
Okay, we're back with Owen and Dawn Connor on the Oribi Farm on the boundary of the Chikwaka TTL in the latter part of 78 and 79 when the war was really hot in that area. And these are Owen's recollections and stories of what happened to him. Remember, with Enterprise, we had what's come to be known as a citizen army. When all the farmers and any occupants of the Enterprise area were involved in the defense of the area, both on the eastern side, which was the Chikwaka Mangwende area, and the western side, which was the Msana Chinamora. So that was where the background that goes with Owen and his men. Owen was essentially, because he lived in the east, he spent most of his time defending that particular part, but not exclusively. This is one entitled House Attacks and the Events Leading Up to Them During the Liberation War. I had a special arrangement with one of my informers, who actually worked in my vegetable garden, that he would draw a sign of a fish in the sand near my vehicle gate if he required to see me. I would then instruct him to meet me in the vegetable garden to discuss new planting, where he could tell me what was happening. One morning, while fitting keys into the locks before opening my main gate, I saw this fish sign had been drawn in the sand. So I drew my pistol and jumped into my mortar pit next to the gate, which was been built in the shape of a triangle with a concrete roof. Coming from the direction of the main Motoko Road, I heard two loud explosions. There was a maize crop between the main house and the main road. I then called my informer to come and brief me. He said there was a man in the maize field with a gun. So I rallied up my armed farm guards, who did a sweep through the maize with no results. Later on, after contacting the Chikwaka, I was able to locate a dead insurgent with an SKS rifle plus a book of events. In the book was a diagram plus measurements in yards of distance from my maize land along with the illustration of my guava trees in my drive, and on the left-hand side, plus a diagram of the cook's house and the small pile of rocks at the back of the property. An SKS rifle with a silver plug at the end of the barrel was also recovered. Obviously, I was being measured up for an attack. After near neighbor Henry Bull's house attack on Neptune Farm, we did a sweep through a crawl line in the Chikwaka with the PATU and other security forces and followed tracks into the crawl where several huts were burning, but in one of them, casual as ever, was a fellow called Jeffrey, reading a newspaper. He said to me, "Morning, Shiro, are you looking for me?" Shiro being my Shona name. I said to Jeffrey, "Well, yes, we are looking for you. What do you want to tell us?" He then turned around and we found out that Jeffrey had actually driven the vehicle that had carried out the attack on the fuel depot some months earlier. And he was quite happy to surrender and came over onto our side. We collected any civilians, telling them to sit beneath a shady tree while we did a sweep. In front of one of the bundles of thatching grass, a figure suddenly appeared with a hand grenade, throwing it at us. The grenade landed right in front of us, but luckily did no damage. The insurgent then raised his arms and stood up and shouted, "Don't shoot." Sorry, very last words. While we were waiting on the side of the house, a white female suddenly strode up from St. Barnaby's mission, which was close by, demanded to know from me why we were burning houses and taking prisoners. I replied that we had not burnt a house and we were not taking prisoners, we were simply searching the area. She supplied that she was taking blankets for the needy in the area and needed to know how many prisoners we were. We all replied that she should take the blankets to the Burrells compound, where the people had lost everything in the fire. She left saying she was going to report me. During the following week, we employed a pre-Gweeby student by the name of Drummond Endersby. He arrived late one afternoon at the house, so I showed him where he was going to sleep in the chalet, near the fence surrounding the house, and not to go outside during the night because there were Adams grenades which I'd set up around the fences, which could be triggered from the house. We'd hardly got him settled in when there was a hooting from the gate, and it was an ambulance from St. Barnaby, driven by the lady we encountered a few days before, not a welcome guest. She told me she'd come to deliver the bales of blankets to the Burrells compound that had been burnt down previously. She had the bales of blankets with her, so we rolled them down into the chalet. She was very butch, so she helped me. Yeah, had she brought the insurgents directly with my immediate question. At midnight, we came under attack, as did our manager Dave and Rose Browns across the road. They used mortars, some of them crossing over my house. Enterprise Base was informed, and I took up a firing position in my kitchen window, which gave me a good field of fire in the direction of the small arms and mortars were coming from. One of the mortars fell short of the house. The small arms bit the chalet roof and some of the bathroom walls. I changed magazines and put one containing tracers. Called out to Drummond in the chalet, was he all right? Drummond, are you okay? Absolutely no reply from Drummond. But at that point, the reinforcements arrived from Enterprise in the shape of the armored crocodile, and the croc roared down the road, the main road, which direction the insurgents were fleeing, and let rip with everything they had on board to chase the insurgents as far away as they possibly could. The croc then came back and went to check on Dave and Rose, and I went to the chalet to find Drummond. He said he couldn't come out as he was sleeping in the neck and kept falling over the bales of blankets. Shame, the poor guy had only just arrived the day before and was a bit disorientated. My firing from the kitchen window broke the windows, although I had opened them for the cartridge cases to fly out, but they still hit the grass. Later that day, Peter Lombard, the district commissioner from Goromonzi, came and we counted the hits on the roof and on the walls. I also expressed to him that my concern about Miss Butch from St. Barnaby's maybe had brought the insurgents to attack me, having had a good look at my house when she brought the blankets. Drummond also said he had thought that I had rather overstated the situation, especially expecting another house attack so soon. So I had not really paid much attention to my briefing. My neighbours, the Forsyths on Melrose Farm, also contacted us to make sure we were okay, as quite a few of the mortar bombs had landed near their fence. From these attacks, I also read from a report book from one of the insurgents that had attacked the house. That came from a contact in the south of the Chikwaka, it's actually in the Chinika area. Comments were, Connor was very angry and shouted, "Damn you, I'm all right," where in fact I was actually referring to Drummond in this particular case. One informer from the neighboring tribal dustbrand was giving me a lot of concern, as all the information would only come through a day late, and he was always demanding extra payments and making threats if the cash was not forthcoming. I then went to Oribi store and cashed a check for $100 and asked them to give it to me all in $2 notes. On leaving the store, I saw the informant. I called him over to my Land Rover and handed over all the $2 notes, which he refused, saying it was not sufficient. He was being watched by others, so his cover was now blown. He disappeared from then onwards. A better way of employing a hitman? One of our first home attacks, when my wife Dawn was staying in town for the week, as my daughter Kerry Lou was boarding with her parents, and they were away, Dawn decided then to obviously stay in with Kerry Lou. It was a Thursday, and Sean came to Avondale from Churchill to say he was returning to Oribi as he felt that I was alone on the farm. At that time, I was also a hail inspector for the Rhodesia Tobacco Association on tobacco crops, and had just finished an assessment in the area. Sean arrived home, and we had a few beers, watched TV, and went to bed. About midnight, I worked what I thought was hail and on the roof and thunder. I got up and went to the toilet and shouted to Sean, "Put the light off, we're under attack." There was safety glass all over the floor. It was an attack with rocket and bullets, so obviously wouldn't be a lot of hail inspecting the next day. I went to the kitchen and fired off an Icarus illuminating flare, which resulted in a ceasefire from the insurgents. The following day, tracks from the vegetable garden across the field, I could see where 4 men had gone to ground, and from there onto the main road going to Oribi store. Later, I phoned Dawn in town. She asked her to please buy patches for the chalet roof. Thankfully, my new Merc was in the garage by the chalet. It had not been harmed whatsoever. But the main walls of the chalet and the bedrooms have taken many bullet holes. Interesting enough, it's an addition, John. It was something. The Chihuahua was actually frozen at the time. Right. The scouts were operating in them, and I never got to find out. But Owen was suspicious that this particular attack was possibly an authentication of the group that was trying to get themselves ensconced in the Chihuahua. Tom Thomas was, in fact, the liaison officer who was with me in the area, running the scouts there, and he, at the end of it, admitted that it was the hardest place he'd ever come across to get a pseudo group authenticated in there. And eventually, they had to say, "Look, we can't do it. We're going to leave it to you, conventional, your citizen forces." It was heavily subverted and a very difficult area because of the number of people to authenticate a group that was not possibly genuine. That's one of Owen's stories. The next one is the stolen fencing. Episode 2, a regular occurrence. While I was on call up, I asked for a PATU stick to look for my fencing, which had been removed from the boundary fence again. I had always painted my standards red at the top. One PATU identified fencing at a house in Chihuahua and gave me the map reference. The actual house was known to me. I asked to be given some men to locate and remove my fencing. A stick of motorcycle PATU guys arrived, along with two bright lights in the vehicle, known as a crocodile. The vehicle was mounted with a Browning machine gun. I was to drive. I proceeded along the Motoko Road and then took the track off to the left towards the old strip road. Crossing a big flay with a dry stream in it, I could see the house and the others about 500 meters away. When we came under small arms fire from the house, the PATU stick and bright lights immediately debussed and commenced to take an open order run towards the house with me still in the vehicle. I found that if I drove down into the stream and then reversed up the gully, I could rush forward and climb the bank. I took a chance and I could hear heavy firing before the forces and the insurgents. I had not yet fired a shot. I made the crossing and headed towards the forces and the house, picking up our men as I went along. The insurgents' firing had now ceased. Meantime, I had contacted Victor Alpha relay station and asked that I needed air support in the form of a police reserve air wing armed aircraft. I confirmed this, and the patrol came in just as we got to the old strip road and could see a group of insurgents with a bazooka and an RPG running across the flag. I braked, and the the Browning gunner took over, firing at the insurgents and they all went to ground. The patrol saw this, indicated to us where the insurgents had left one of their men behind and some kit. The rest of the insurgents headed for the Ngui River, which was the boundary with the Mangwende. With the Browning firing over my cab, I was having trouble concentrating because of the noise and had to cover my ears. I then started the croc, which promptly stalled. This necessitated the bright lights and others to get out and push the vehicle to start it again. Certainly it was all a bit hairy. The vehicle eventually stopped and everyone debussed and headed for the crawl and the store at Gua. People were fleeing from the crawl and from the store. The insurgents took up a position on the road drain with a mortar. The Browning was now firing at a target at right angles, so I was able to stand up on the driver's seat to engage the man with the mortar. I had trouble keeping myself steady and trying to get a good shot, and I fired about 5 rounds at the insurgent, and he left for a safer place. We did a sweep along the crawl, and Pro called us to where there was an insurgent had gone to ground, and there were some bodies from the Browning firing. On approaching the target area, an extended line, we came under fire from a small ant heap. We took cover behind a contour. A head would pop up with the AK every few seconds and sending bullets after us. After seeing this, I held steady on the ant heap where the head would appear, which I did. And I squeezed off a shot from my prone position from behind the contour. End of that. Some of the bright lights went to recover weapons from the insurgents, saying that he had taken 1 clean headshot. The patrol then left the area with our thanks to Victor Alpha returned to base. Next day, with support from the base, I escorted a tractor and labour from my home by the old strip road to secure the fencing. We removed and recovered all my fencing.
Sure.
An issue for Owen on many occasions, as you can gather from the other stories.
Yeah.
Right, motorcycle ambushes during the Liberation War. I can remember where there was a briefing before. I can't remember there was a briefing before this event or not. But the motorbikes were to travel to Jaquaca from the road on the old strip road going north. There were 6 in our unit, 2 men together in case of flat tires or mechanical problems. The crop with a group of 10 men would take the north main dirt road that ran parallel to where we were running, but about 10 kilometers apart. In our motorbike stick was Andy Hartel, stick leader, with myself, Bucks Housen, and Kevin Simpson, and my pre-Gweeby student, Drummond Endersby, and Glenn Dixon, who was not only a PATU man, but he was a mechanic and serviced and looked after any breakdowns we might have on the way. At that point, the guys on the crop, who were at that point led by Jacques de Marini, who was a farmer not very far from Owen. He was a Frenchman who had been farming in Mauritius before he emigrated to Rhodesia. Very good farmer, in fact. At that particular point, the guys on the crop called to say they were having fuel issues. So we decided to ride across to them so Glenn could get onto the croc and sort it out. It was a perennial problem we had with that vehicle with fuel issues. We arrived at the croc and Glenn set to work to solve the fuel problem, which he did. We then returned on the same track, which once again take us past the same crawl. Now, in the back of my mind, I recalled a story from a book written about the Boer War, which says during warfare, as a rule, you never take the same way back. However, this we had done. As we passed the crawl the second time, we came under fire from the huts. One of the weapons being fired at us was clearly an RPD, a light machine gun. The first time I'd ever been shot at by one of those weapons. I knew to get off and away from my bike. We'd been trained on ditching with the bikes, being able to throw them down and then use them as cover or roll away from them, as they tended to attract fire. Turn the handlebars and brake and the back and go down on the left-hand side. The RPD's bullets were concentrated on my bike, so I rolled and scrambled away, taking cover on a contour and returning fire. When the RPD changed direction on targets, I crawled back to my bike, as I had my ammo box with additional magazines on board. One of them had tracer, and this is what I changed to. I moved away firing tracers, Small arms were still kicking up dust as the insurgents searched for targets. I couldn't actually see them from where I was firing. All the bikers were by now returning fire. I proceeded to fire at the hut's thatched roof, which caught a light. I saw a head appear in the doorway and fired in that direction. My FN bullets penetrating the walls, and about 12 men came running out. We stood and poured heavy fire into them, and they ran down the footpath away from the crawl. I had to hold myself steady to make sure I was not shaking too much to shoot straight. Andy had called in for air support when we had come under fire. Then we followed the insurgent gapping down the footpath. I can't actually recall. But then a lynx arrived as top cover for us. On the right-hand side, the land sloped down towards a watercourse. The lynx could see a huge grass flare with men running, so he dropped a fram onto that area, setting all the grass alight. We waited for the inferno to die down. Now, in the meantime, the croc had broken down again, and we had to send back to the farm for a tractor to tow it. Once the fire died down, we descended to the stream in the flay in open order. 4 men on the south side, being Andy and myself, come walking along the bank upstream. There was a long pool below us, so Andy threw in some communist concussion grenades, and a body shot up to the surface. Andy and I continued walking up the stream, firing into the water, where more bodies came to the surface, 4 in total. We pulled them out the bank, and as they were dressed in distinctive type uniforms, a little bit like what Frelimo had, we took their uniforms off, as I knew that the special branch always wanted anything unusual like that to help the scouts authenticate themselves in fresh clothing. There were some women hiding in the area we were searching and in the crawl line. We asked them to identify who the dead were. They, of course, denied any knowledge whatsoever who they were. I was particularly keen on discovering the RPD, as it would be a very useful weapon for use on our motorcycle sticks. All the huts collapsed in the area, as the Fran had also set them alight. If there was anything left, unfortunately, it would have been useless by now. The lynx had left, returning back to Matoka with our thanks, and to Victor Alpha for assistance. We returned back to base at the farm. As you can see, John, things were not exactly comfortable in that particular area, almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
This is Owen's final story, and it really concentrates, as he wrote this, he said, I want you to please emphasize that he really felt he had extrasensorial perception quite often, not only in his war career, but in his hunting career.
Yeah.
And he draws it from John Sharp's book, which is called Facing Down Fear. And, you know, I think anyone who was involved in the war would know full well that fear we didn't know, but absolute terror we did. Anyone who weren't scared, it's you know, to take adrenaline obviously took over. Twice during the warfare, I owe my life to my sixth sense. We were called to a briefing at the Enterprise Club at 6 p.m. towards the end of winter. In fact, I remember it was September. The briefing was done by Mike Norton, and who had information that 75 insurgents were going to gather at Gua School the following day. Our task was to get to the school with our stick of 6 people, with a further motorcycle stick holding off about 2 to 3 kilometers away, to see what happened and to be there to help if contact ensued. At that point, there was an external raid in Mozambique, so air power was limited, but we had managed to find a lynx that was sitting on the ground in Matoka and had been promised, should he not be tasked elsewhere, if we made contact, he would be able to come across and help. The trusty Pro, of course, was still available, sitting on the ground at Frascati Farm airstrip, and was available at a moment's notice to come and assist. I was a little apprehensive of this 12 against 75. However, the job had to be done, so we got ready to move the first light the next morning. We checked what the Lynx would be armed with, and it was armed with front gun, Frantan, and Sneb rockets. So it made quite a formidable machine. Arriving at the school and riding through the gate with stone walls on either side, we came to a stop, as we could see by the spoor there, that there'd been a large parade, many footprints, all in lines. We debussed and took cover, and then went up to the classrooms where school lessons were taking place, all very orderly, far too orderly. We collected the headmaster out of the class to question him. We'd parked our motorcycles next to the banana plantations that ran all the way down the crawl adjacent to the school. We went into the schoolroom and started questioning the headmaster, who then promptly fell on the floor, shouting and screaming, which we were a bit surprised at, but we felt what he was trying to do was let the insurgents know that we were in the school questioning him. Once he calmed down a bit, the other stick came in to help, and that comprised of several people, including Jerry Lancaster and Tony Carruthers-Smith, who was actually ex-SAS. I was concerned about the motorcycles being in the banana plantation and decided to move them away. But my ESP warned me that I could expect to be fired on any moment. I decided to occupy a high point close to some high boulders, along with 3 men, namely Mick Taggart, Mike Neese, and Bucks Howson, as an observation post. The 3 men, Andy Hartel, Glenn Dixon, and Drummond Endersby, moved towards the banana plantation where we had removed the bikes. They came under fire and took cover, breaking away from and running towards the headmaster. Broke away and ran towards the class and was caught in crossfire and lay on the ground calling for help. He had a bullet wound in his thigh and actually died of shock later. Meantime, I communicated radio to Mike Norton, who was on the croc not very far away, and the Lynx was scrambled. He was actually airborne at the time anyway, so got to us very quickly. He flew over my head to assess the scene and asked me to fire a red tracer into the area where we were being fired at. My OP position also came under fire from about 5 meters away from above us, but none of the bullets hitting the boulders, luckily, which we were hiding behind the boulders. The Lynx then dropped Fran into the banana plantation. All firing promptly stopped. One insurgent must have been out of the area, fired at me, and I was standing up at the boulder giving directions to the Lynx. By this point, the croc had arrived and had joined in close to us, waiting off with the machine gun pointing in the direction of the insurgents. We felt the insurgents had fled. The second stick started a searching party in the toilets and the classrooms, and emerged with 7 prisoners and weapons. They'd been hiding in the toilet block, and a judicious grenade had made them lose interest in any further fighting. They had bombshelled out of the gate, and one of them, who was one of these men was a section commander, and he was put on the OP for questioning by me. The others went to sit in an open area in front of us so we could guard them. As all men were now collecting weapons and prisoners. From a personal point, I then joined in with Jerry Lancaster, and the 2 of us were sweeping down the banana plantations in the crawl. Jerry was always armed with an RPD. He was an ex-SIS police special investigation section soldier, a very experienced combat individual. As we swept towards one particularly thick banana plantation, we came under fire from what felt like several weapons. We took cover in a ditch and returned fire while I called to the Lynx to come and overhead and try and give us some cover. I threw a white phos grenade in the direction of the where we were being fired at, and the Lynx turned and came in live. He only had at that point some front gun, and a couple of rockets left, but as usual was spot on the area, and the firing died down. It didn't stop. I suddenly realized that I was firing alone, and Jerry had gone very quiet next to me. So I looked at him, and his RPD had a stoppage, which was only very unusual for those kind of fantastic weapons. But Jerry was trying to clear. Eventually, he gave it up, laid the weapon aside, grabbed one of the captured AKs, and we carried on and swept towards the area where the Fran had put in, the strike had been put in there, to find one fellow still firing at us, who we got rid of, and quite a few other bodies in that particular area. So it had been a worthwhile strike. Just back to what Owen now. One insurgent suddenly broke away and decided to make a dash for about 600 meters across some vacant land. He came out of one of the other banana plantations. I then pushed my sights up 600 meters and started firing. He went to ground after about a 600-meter run. I changed my magazine and I lit a cigarette and found I already had one in my mouth, so I smoked both of them. I'd called the other motorbike stick and directed them towards where he had fallen. They did a walk, bringing back to a halt in the firing, and created a huge dust storm. The truck had now moved up closer to load the prisoners and casevac any civilians who'd been wounded in the crossfire. There was a huge pit in the banana plantations, which had been freshly dug for cooking. Clearly, the headmaster had been expecting a large number of insurgents to appear at this particular place. The section commander said the main person in charge was the detachment political commissar, and he jumped over the wall of the school and had run towards the other crawls. So when all was secured and the prisoners handed over, I decided very foolishly to investigate the other side of the wall for any dropped arms or kit on my own. I left the OP and walked to the front gate, checking the spoor for anything else. I found where the political commissar had gone over the wall and fallen on the other side, but had got up and ran off again. I decided to follow his spoor into the bush when I got that same feeling again, that I was being watched. The praw was still flying around. The lynx had left to refuel. I suddenly got the feeling that I was being watched. I flicked my safety catch off and started to walk backwards, my FN in my shoulder, ready to fire. The praw called as I retreated to tell me that there was a figure some meters away aiming at me. The praw put down some fire in that particular area, and I leapt back over the wall, feeling a bit sheepish for myself. By now, the scene had just about been cleaned up, and we had 7 prisoners and 15 bodies and weapons. Later that day, a stick of police reserve were brought in to guard the farm, to guard the school. They had to abandon this in that first evening, as flares were put up on both sides of the school, and there was no way that 4 men could defend a school that size when they're in the area around were at least 70 or 50 or 70 more insurgents. It would have been purely foolhardy. John, that's Owen's stories. As you can say, a guy who really was very heavily involved in the war in that area. And as I said before, the citizen force of Enterprise kept Enterprise intact right up to the end. And it was contributions of men like him and many others.
Yeah.
But Owen was particularly prominent in that particular area. Another chapter of the story.
And yourself, Mike. I am very grateful to you for gathering these stories. They've been extremely well received. I think people are enjoying the diversity of the series because they're starting to see the big picture of the war from the point of view of the farm attacks and the wives and what life was like living during that trying time. the absolute bravery, I think, of some of these farmers. I didn't really have to experience that myself because I was always surrounded by a bunch of heavily armed RLI thugs, you know. So I don't know what it would be like to be a woman on my own somewhere in the bush, you know, with expecting an attack at any time. But I think these stories are extremely valuable, and I'm really grateful to Owen and Dawn for sharing them with us. Thank you very much, Mike. Much appreciated.
It's a pleasure, John. Great pleasure. Thank you.